The elderly black woman opened her door, trembling, as the landlord shoved an eviction notice into her hands. "Pack your things. You're out by tonight," he barked. She whispered, "Please, I've paid every month." He smirked, tearing her receipt in half. Tenants watched as he shouted, "This is my building. I can throw you out whenever I want." Just then, a black SUV pulled up. A tall man in a suit stepped out, eyes locked on the landlord. "Is this how you treat my mother?" The landlord froze. He had no idea who he was talking to. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from so we can bring more stories like these. Mornings in the Magnolia Arms apartments always began the same way. Soft light drifting through dusty hallway windows. A radio playing old soul music somewhere on the third floor. The gentle clatter of someone brewing coffee. And the quiet shuffle of Miss Evelyn Brooks watering the plants lined up outside her apartment door. She moved slowly, but purposefully, humming an old hymn under her breath. Something her grandmother used to sing while snapping green beans on a porch, long gone. Evelyn Brooks was 74 years old, 5'2", with soft brown skin mapped by decades of laughter and life. Her hair, silver as moonlight, was wrapped in a patterned scarf. Her eyes, warm, gentle, tired only sometimes, held a softness most people didn't earn anymore. She lived in apartment 3B, the same one she'd gotten when she was barely in her 40s, when the building was still lively and filled with families, and the smell of Sunday dinners drifting into the hallway. Now, most of her old neighbors had either passed on or been pushed out by newer landlords wanting bigger rents. But Evelyn stayed. Not because she was stubborn, though some would say she was, but because she had built a life here. And a home isn't something you abandon just because the world forgets its value. That morning, the hallway smelled faintly of bleach from her early cleaning. She always swept outside her door, even though it wasn't her job. She said it kept her connected to the building, kept it feeling like a community, not just a place folks slept. Evelyn knelt slowly, watering her favorite fern. "Come on now, baby," she told it gently. "Can't start drooping on me. We too old for dramatics." She chuckled at her own joke. Inside the apartment, a pot of oatmeal simmered on the stove. The small living room, furnished with second-hand chairs and a sofa older than her son, held knitted blankets in every color, and a coffee table stacked with devotionals and crossword books. Her knitting needles rested in a basket by her recliner, half-finished blanket draped across it. She lived simply, but she lived peacefully. Her mornings followed a rhythm. Water plants, warm breakfast, pray, knit, check on the neighbors' kids when they left for school, sit by the window and watch the city slowly wake up. She had a tiny pension, barely enough, but enough for someone who knew how to stretch blessings farther than most. Her phone vibrated on the counter. She wiped her hands on her apron and picked it up. A message from Jonathan. Just 3 words. "Morning, Ma. Love you." Evelyn's whole face softened. Jonathan always sent that text at exactly 6:30 a.m., no matter how busy he was. Half the time, she didn't even know where in the country he was working. Chicago, D.C., or some courthouse she couldn't pronounce. He wasn't just successful. He was brilliant. A man who could walk into a room and quiet it without raising his voice. A man whose suits cost more than her monthly pension, but he never reminded her of that. To Evelyn, he was still the shy little boy she adopted at age 7, small for his age, sad in ways that made her heart ache. The boy who used to cling to her skirt when he had nightmares. Now he was grown, Important, busy, too busy to visit often, but he always called, and that was enough for her. She typed back slowly on her old phone. Love you too, baby. Stay blessed. She put the phone down just as there was a soft knock on her door. When she opened it, little Maya from down the hall stood there in her pink backpack, grinning with 2 missing front teeth. Miss Evelyn, Mama said I can get a hug before school. Evelyn opened her arms wide. Come here, sugar. The little girl squeezed her tightly, then dashed off as her mom called from the stairwell. Period. Thank you, Miss Brooks. You're a lifesaver, Evelyn waved. Always happy to help. She closed the door, heart warm. People thought she lived alone, but she didn't feel alone. The building had become her extended family over the years. Young moms, tired fathers, kids who ran to her for cookies after school. She didn't boast about Jonathan. She never felt the need. Folks assumed she had no family, and she didn't correct them. Her son's life was demanding, and she didn't like attention. Humility suited her. She returned to the kitchen and stirred the oatmeal, sprinkling cinnamon on top. She carried her bowl to her recliner, sat slowly, and whispered a small prayer. Lord, thank you for another day, for these walls, this roof, these neighbors. Keep watch over my boy, wherever he is, and keep me strong. Her voice trembled slightly at the end. The kind of tremble that comes from carrying the weight of life alone for too long. Outside, footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. New foo. Hard, heavy, unfriendly. Evelyn didn't look up at first. She didn't know yet that everything was about to change. That piece could be as fragile as the leaves on her fern. She didn't know that a man with cold eyes and colder intentions was walking straight toward her door. She didn't know that by sunset, her quiet world would be shaken to its core. For now, she was just Evelyn, just a soft-spoken woman in her 70s. Just someone who gave love freely and expected nothing in return. She didn't know her gentleness was about to be tested. Not yet. The new landlord came with a new smell. Not paint, not cleaner, not fresh wood or new carpet. Greed has its own scent. Sharp, chemical, fake like cheap cologne. It started the week after the notice of new ownership letters slid under everyone's door. Magnolia Arms had been sold. The old owner, Mr. Diaz, had been kind, soft-spoken, patient with late payments, always fixing what he could, even if it took time. He knew everybody's name, knew who'd lost a job, who'd had a new baby, who needed a little grace. The new owner? He didn't know anybody, and he didn't care to. His name was Mr. Stephen Clark, and the first time Evelyn saw him, he was standing in the hallway with a clipboard, squinting at apartment numbers like they were items on a clearance rack he meant to flip. He was in his 40s, hair slicked back, wearing a tight dress shirt and slacks that didn't quite fit right. His smile never reached his eyes. He glanced at her plants, at her crocheted welcome mat, at the way she'd swept and mopped her section of the hallway. "Morning," she said kindly, holding a small trash bag she'd just collected from the stairwell. "You must be the new owner. I'm Miss Brooks, apartment 3B. Welcome." He didn't smile back, just gave a small nod. "Uh-huh. You the one with the rent-controlled lease?" Evelyn blinked once. "I've lived here 30 years, sir. My rent's stable, yes." "Mm-hmm." He scribbled something on his clipboard. "We'll be reviewing all that." She kept her voice gentle. "Well, if you need any help, I know most of the tenants. Folks been here a long time." He looked past her like he wasn't there. "Sure," he muttered. "We'll see." That was the first cut. Small, easy to dismiss. She went back inside and told herself, he's just busy. New owners get stressed, he'll calm down. But he didn't. The first complaint came 2 days later. A knock on her door, sharp, heavy, impatient. Bang, bang, bang. Evelyn jumped, almost dropping her mug. She shuffled to the door and opened it, smiling automatically. "Good afternoon, Mr. Clark." He didn't bother with a greeting. "You're late," he snapped, holding a folded paper in his hand. Her smile faltered. I beg your pardon?" "Your rent," he said. "Due on the 1st. It's the 3rd. She blinked. "Sir, I turned it in on the 1st, like I always do, to the box outside the office." "Office box is gone," he said. "You hand payments directly to me now." "Oh, no one told me." "Not my problem," he cut in. "If I don't have the money, it might as well not exist." She took a breath. "Let me get my receipt." She walked to the small table by the door, opened a drawer, and pulled out her neatly folded paper. A stamped, dated receipt from the building office. She handed it to him with slightly trembling fingers. He snatched it, glanced at it, then scoffed. "Yeah, well, this isn't my system." He crumpled the receipt in his hand. Evelyn frowned slightly. "Sir, that's my proof." He crushed it tighter, then shoved it back at her. "You pay on the 1st, to me. Next time you're late, it'll be a problem." He turned and walked away. She smoothed the wrinkled paper with her palm, heart thudding. The second cut, not deep enough to bleed yet, but enough to sting. The next complaint was about the plants. Evelyn was in the hallway, wiping down the railing, when she heard footsteps stomping up the stairs. "Miss Brooks!" Mr. Clark's voice rang out. She paused, turned, and offered him a polite smile. "Yes, sir." He gestured angrily at her plants. "What is all this?" She looked at the small jungle of green along the wall. Potted ferns, a spider plant, a peace lily, a little snake plant in a chipped blue pot. "Oh," she said softly, "just my little garden. They don't bother nobody. I make sure they don't block the walkway." "These are a hazard," he said. "Fire code violation." She blinked. "They've been here for years. The inspector—" "I'm not the old owner," he interrupted, "and I'm not playing games with fines." He pulled a folded paper from his clipboard and slapped it against the wall. "You have 24 hours to remove these," he said, "or I'll have maintenance toss them." Her chest, T. "They're not in the way," she insisted gently. "I water them. I clean up any spills. I've kept them up since my son was little. They're all I have to talk to some days." He rolled his eyes. "Get a hobby that doesn't violate regulations." She swallowed the hurt. "Yes, sir," she answered. When he left, she stood there a long time, staring at her plants. "I'm sorry, babies," she whispered. "Guess we causing trouble now." She touched each leaf like an apology. That night, long after most people had gone to bed, she moved them inside her apartment. One by one, pot by pot, body aching, breath shallow, heart heavy. The hallway looked bare without them, colder, less hers. The third cut. The knocks started late at night. The first one came at 10:42 p.m., rattling her doorframe. Bang, bang, bang. Evelyn jerked awake in her recliner, TV still glowing softly with some old rerun. She shuffled to the door, robe around her shoulders. "Who is it?" She called out. "Management," Mr. Clark's voice snapped. "Open up." She unlocked the door and cracked it open. "Sir, is something wrong?" she asked, blinking sleep from her eyes. He looked past her into the apartment, scanning everything. The neatly stacked books, the knit blankets, the old armchair, the cross on the wall. "We got a noise complaint," he said. She frowned. "From who?" "Doesn't matter," he said. "You playing loud TV after hours." She glanced at the screen. Volume at 6 out of 100. "Sir, I keep it low," she said gently. "My hearing's good. Ain't no parties here." He smirked. "Well, I heard something." She almost laughed at that. "Sir, I live alone. It's just me here." He leaned against the doorframe. "Visitors aren't allowed after 10 either," he added, like it was fact. I don't Have visitors, she said, confused. Haven't in a while. Then keep the noise down, he snapped anyway. You're not the only one in this building. And just like that, he walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, heart racing, throat tight. She closed the door slowly and leaned her forehead against it. Lord, she whispered. Why he got his eye on me like that? She knew. She just didn't want to say it out loud. Over the next few weeks, the little cuts kept coming. He left notes on her door. Hallway area not your property. Keep door closed at all times. Apartment subject to random inspections. He'd lose her maintenance requests. Claim her rent was missing until she showed duplicate receipts. Walk past her without a hello, then complain she was uncooperative. The neighbors started whispering in the stairwells. You get a notice too? Yeah. Says I owe late fees from years ago. I don't. He wants us out. He trying to flip this whole building. But among elderly tenants, the pattern was clear. Mrs. Diaz down the hall got slapped with a sudden no pets rule after 11 years with her cat. Mr. Harris, on the second floor, got 3 noise violations in a week. He was half deaf and lived alone. The single mom, Teresa, got emails threatening lease termination over trash left near her door when it was kids from another floor. And Evelyn? She was the easiest target, the old woman with the soft smile, the one who never raised her voice, the one who always answered the door. One afternoon, she stepped into the lobby to collect her mail and heard 2 tenants murmuring near the mailboxes. He's trying to push out the rent-controlled folks first, one whispered. Once they're gone, he can jack up the rent. Who's left like that? The other asked. The first one jerked their chin subtly toward Evelyn. Her and a few others, but she's the easiest one. Evelyn pretended she hadn't heard. She shuffled back to her apartment, mail clutched to her chest. Inside her living room, she sat down slowly, breathing through the ache in her chest. She slid open one envelope, another envelope, a church newsletter, then one more, a notice from management. Subject, Lease Compliance Review, Unit 3B. Her hands trembled. She read each line slowly. They were reviewing her lease. They were concerned about her timely payments. They needed to verify she still complied with residency requirements. She took a deep breath. Sir, I've lived here peacefully all my life, she had told him once. Not anymore, he'd replied. She folded the notice carefully, tucking it into the drawer with all her receipts. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Jonathan. You okay, Ma? She stared at the screen for a long moment. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could tell him everything about the notices, the late-night knocks, the way her chest hurt a little more every day, the way the place she called home suddenly didn't feel safe. Instead, she typed, I'm all right, baby. Just tired. Proud of you. Love you. And hit send. Because that's what mothers do sometimes. They hide the storm so their children can keep shining in the sun. She looked around her apartment, her knitted blankets, her faded curtains, her plants now lined up against the window inside instead of outside. She whispered, barely audible, I ain't going nowhere. This is my home. But deep down, she already knew. He wasn't going to stop, and one day soon, he was going to try and throw her out. The cruelest part, he thought she was alone. He thought she had no one. He thought she was just some old woman with nobody to fight for her. He had no idea. Her son's name carried the weight of a federal courtroom. And when he pushed too hard, that quiet love he underestimated was going to come back like a storm. It happened on a Wednesday. Not a special Wednesday, not a holiday. Just a plain, cloudless day where the sun was too bright and the air too still. The kind of day where trouble looks out of place. Right up until it do. Evelyn was in her kitchen, folding dish towels, when the first knock came. Not the usual 3 soft taps from Mrs. Diaz. Not little Maya's rapid, I'm excited knock. This one was ugly, hard, angry, intentional. Bang, bang, bang. The sound echoed down the hallway, rattling her cabinet doors. Her heart jumped. She wiped her hands on her apron and shuffled toward the door, knees complaining with each step. "Yes, 1 second," she called, voice a little shaky. The knocking came again, louder. "I said I'm coming," she whispered to herself, more to soothe her nerves than anything. She opened the door. There he was, Mr. Stephen Clark, clipboard, phone in his hand, eyes already annoyed. Behind him, a few neighbors peeked out of their own doors. Just a crack, just enough to see, not enough to be seen. "Afternoon, sir," Evelyn said softly. "Something I can help?" He cut her off by thrusting a stack of papers toward her. "You can help by getting your things out," he snapped. She blinked, confused. I'm sorry?" "You're being evicted," he said flatly. "You have until tonight." The word hit her like it had physical weight. "Evicted?" she repeated, voice small. "There must be a mistake." "No mistake," he said, smirking. "You violated your lease terms. This is official notice." Her fingers trembled as she took the papers. Notice to vacate immediately. Cause: non-payment of rent, property damage, repeated violation of tenant rules. Her eyes blurred as she scanned the page. No, she whispered. "I pay my rent. I always pay my rent. I don't damage nothing. I keep my place." "Your payments have been irregular," he interrupted, "and we have documentation of your lease violations." She swallowed hard. "I keep all my receipts," she said with a hint of strength. If you'll give me a moment, I can show." He rolled his eyes dramatically. "Here we go," he muttered, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Every time with people like you." He pushed past her gently but firmly, stepping halfway into her doorway, like he already owned the space she had called home for 30 years. "Sir, please," she said weakly. "This is my house. Don't just—" "Apartment," he corrected sharply, "and it's my building." The hallway had grown busier now. Mrs. Diaz stood at her door, hand on her mouth. Mr. Harris leaned on his cane at the top of the stairs. Teresa, the young mom from the second floor, clutched her toddler's hand. They watched, half wanting to help, half terrified of being next. Evelyn shuffled to the small drawer by her door and pulled it open with unsteady fingers. Inside were neat stacks of folded papers, rent receipts, all stamped. Month after month, year after year, her proof she wasn't lying, her proof she had done everything right. She pulled out the most recent stack and turned back to him. "Here," she said. "Look, every month, on time. I don't miss, sir. I don't. Please." He took the papers from. She held her breath. For just a moment, hope flickered in her chest. Then he ripped them, right down the middle, right there in her doorway, in front of everyone. Paper fell like snow to the floor. The sound of tearing echoed louder than his voice. Evelyn gasped. "Why would you—" "Sir, those are my records." He shrugged. "They're not my records. They don't mean anything to me." Her chest hurt. He stepped back into the hallway and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "You've been warned," he announced. "You're being evicted for non-payment, damage, and disturbing other tenants. I'm being generous giving you till tonight." "Damage?" someone whispered under their breath. "She don't even move her furniture." Non-payment, Ms. Brooks? Nah. He pointed at the notice in her hand. You can stand there and argue all you want, but you're leaving. Pack your things, or I'll have maintenance throw them in the dumpster. That word landed like a slap. Dumpster. 30 years of lies. Memories, photos, blankets, her Bible, her plants, thrown away like trash. Her legs wobbled. She reached blindly for the chair near the door and collapsed into it, the paper falling into her lap. Her vision blurred. Her ears rang. The hallway and voices became muted, like she was underwater. She could hear people talking around her. This ain't right. He can't do that. You want him to come for you next? Her throat was too tight to speak. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled over, rolling down her soft, lined cheeks. She didn't wail, didn't scream, didn't curse. She cried the way quiet people do, softly, like each tear carried an apology she didn't owe. Mr. Clark huffed impatiently. Look, I don't have all day, he said. You had your time. This building is moving in a different direction. Mrs. Diaz stepped forward timidly. Mr. Clark, she's lived here longer than all of us. She always pays. Maybe there's been a mistake. He whirled on her. You want to volunteer your unit next? He snapped. She flinched and backed away. Her eyes filled with tears too, but she said nothing else. Fear was a powerful silencer. He turned back to Evelyn, tapping the paper in her lap. Tonight, he repeated, or your stuff goes in the trash. I'm done talking. He turned and walked down the hallway, shoes clicking against the floor with annoying confidence. The tenants parted for him. Nobody touched him. Nobody blocked his path. He reached the stairs and disappeared. The silence he left behind was thick. Mrs. Diaz rushed to Evelyn's side. Evelyn, honey, breathe, breathe, she whispered, rubbing her shoulder. Evelyn's hand shook as she tried to catch her breath. I ain't got nowhere to go, she whispered. I paid. I always paid. Why's he doing this? Because he's the devil, Teresa muttered from the doorway, anger low and hot. He wants us all gone. You're just the first one he thinks he can push out. Mr. Harris shook his head slowly. This ain't legal. Legal or not, he got money, someone else said. We don't. He can outpaper us. The residents spoke in hushed, fearful tones, glancing at each other, at Evelyn, at the stairs. They wanted to help, but they were afraid. Afraid of losing the only roof they had. Afraid of being next. Evelyn stared at the crumpled notice in her lap. Her chest felt tight, like something heavy was sitting on it. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. Please, she said, tears still falling. Just give me time to call my son. The words were meant for the landlord, but he was already gone. Mrs. Diaz wiped her eyes and knelt beside her. I'll help you call him, okay? Right now, we'll explain. You don't have to do this alone. Evelyn nodded weakly. He's busy, she whispered, working so hard. I don't want to trouble him. Teresa stepped forward. He's your son. Troubling him is his blessing. Give me your phone, Missy. Evelyn's hands fumbled with her pocket. She pulled out her old phone and handed it over. Teresa crouched down beside her, thumb hovering over the screen. What's his name in here? She asked gently. Evelyn sniffed, voice so soft they had to lean in to hear it. Jonathan, she said. My Jonathan. Teresa scrolled, then found it. Got him, she said. You want me to talk first? Evelyn shook her head, wiped her eyes, and straightened her shoulders just a little. No, she whispered. I need to hear his voice. Teresa pressed dial and placed the phone in her hand. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, hey, Ma. That voice, warm, gentle, steady. Evelyn's eyes overflowed again. "Baby," she whispered, voice cracking. I'm sorry to bother you while you work." His tone sharpened immediately. "You never bother me. What's wrong?" She drew in a shaky breath. "My landlord," she said, her voice shaking. He's trying to put me out. Says I gotta leave today. I paid, Jonathan. I swear I paid every month." There was a pause on the line. A dangerous, quiet pause. "Where are you right now?" Jonathan asked. "In my doorway," she said. "The neighbors are here. He gave me some paper, says eviction on it." "Put someone on the phone," Jonathan said. "One of the neighbors. I want them to read it to me." She handed the phone to Teresa, who took it with a firm nod. "Yes, sir. I'm Teresa. I live on 2A. I'm here with her. I'm about to read it." Her voice grew louder, more confident as she went through the document line by line. Illegal wording, false claims of non-payment, no court seal, threats to remove property without formal process. When she finished, Jonathan's voice came through like steel wrapped in silk. "Don't let anyone touch my mother's things," he said. "I'm on my way." Evelyn tried to protest. "Baby, you don't have to." "I said," he repeated calmly, "I'm on my way." The call ended. Teresa looked at her with wide eyes. "How far he live?" she asked. Evelyn sniffed. "He works out of state. He busy. He comin'," Mr. Harris said quietly, leaning on his cane. "I heard that tone. That man's not playing." Mrs. Diaz squeezed Evelyn's hand. "You're not alone, querida," she whispered. "Not today." Down the hallway, a few doors clicked shut as nervous tenants retreated, not wanting to get involved. But more stayed this time. More watched, because something had shifted. The building that had been quiet for too long was waking up. None of them knew exactly who Jonathan was. They just knew the way Evelyn said his name. Soft, proud, like she was holding a miracle. And in 2 hours, when that black SUV rolled up in front of Magnolia Arms, they were all gonna find out exactly who they had underestimated. 2 hours passed slowly for everyone inside Magnolia Arms. For Evelyn, they felt lie. She sat in her doorway, with her hands folded tightly in her lap. The eviction notice still resting beside her like a threat she couldn't escape. Mrs. Diaz stayed by her side, whispering prayers under her breath. Teresa paced the hallway like a guard dog ready to bite. Mr. Harris leaned on his cane, his old soldier posture creeping back into his stance. Tenants who usually avoided drama stood nearby, watching, waiting, whispering, because everyone sensed it. Something was coming, something big. At exactly 5:14 p.m., a deep black SUV turned the corner onto Magnolia Street. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, it wasn't speeding. But the moment it slowed in front of the building, every head in the hallway turned toward the front windows. The SUV parked with calm precision. Engine off. Silence. Then, the driver's door opened. Dot. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly composed. His suit was charcoal gray, crisp, tailored to perfection. His shoes shined like they'd never touched dirt. His tie was straight. His presence was sharp. He didn't look like someone who rushed. He looked like someone who commanded. His expression wasn't angry, not yet, but it was tight, focused, controlled in a way that made the air thicken. Teresa whispered, "Lord, that man look important." Mrs. Diaz clutched her chest. Is that really her son?" Mr. Harris let out a low whistle. "That boy ain't no regular office worker. You can tell from the walk. Because indeed, This man walked, not hurried, not casual, not confused. He walked like he owned the ground. Every step steady, every movement deliberate. A quiet storm in a tailored suit. Jonathan stepped into Magnolia Arms, pushing open the front door with a single, firm motion. The dim, aging lobby seemed to shrink around him. The peeling paint, the buzzing fluorescent light, the stack of ignored maintenance requests. Everything suddenly looked small next to him. He took in the environment in 3 slow, assessing glances. Then he climbed the stairs. 1 flight, 2 flights. No hesitation, no uncertainty. He knew exactly where he was going. By the time he reached the 3rd floor, tenants had fully cleared pathways for him, stepping aside instinctively. He didn't have to ask. People moved because something in him commanded respect without a single word. Ma. Evelyn lifted her head at the sound of footsteps approaching, but only when she heard his voice did her breath catch. Ma. Her eyes filled instantly. Jonathan dropped to one knee in front of her, taking her hands gently in his. "Let me see you," he said softly. She reached up, cupping his face with trembling fingers. "You came all this way." "You called," he replied. "That's all it takes." She closed her eyes, overwhelmed. He was her anchor, her safe place. Even as a child, he always ran to her for comfort. Now, he was the one giving it. But the gentleness vanished the moment he stood. His face hardened. His attention shifted to the folded eviction notice at her side. He picked it up between 2 fingers like it was something contaminated. "What is this?" Teresa stepped forward. "Sir, he gave that to her today. Said she gotta leave by tonight. It ain't legal." He ripped her receipts right in front of everyone. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He turned slowly, scanning the hallway. "Where is he?" he asked. No one needed clarification. Everyone knew who he meant. A voice answered from the far end of the hallway. "Well, well, well." Mr. Stephen Clark appeared, smirking as he strolled toward them, holding his clipboard like a badge of power. He didn't recognize Jonathan at all, which was exactly his mistake. "I told you people, no visitors after 10, Clark said loudly, arms opening in mock authority. "And this is definitely not visiting hours." Jonathan didn't move, didn't even blink. Clark looked him up and down, unimpressed. "Sir," Clark said with a sneer, "this hallway is for tenants only. Unless you're here to help her pack, I suggest you step outside." The tenants gasped. Mrs. Diaz whispered a prayer. Teresa clenched her jaw so tight it cracked. Clark stepped closer, smirking deeper. "What are you? Her nephew? Her pastor? Her little helper?" Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open. A gold badge glinted under the dim hallway lights. The seal of the United States Judiciary. Clark's smirk vanished. Jonathan's voice dropped to a level that made even the walls straighten. "I'm Judge Jonathan Brooks," he said softly. "Eastern District, Federal Court." Silence. Pure, heavy silence. Nobody breathed. Nobody blinked. Nobody. Jonathan stepped forward, lowering his ID so the landlord had no choice but to meet his eyes. "And I'm here," Jonathan continued, "for my mother." Clark stumbled back a half step, clipboard slipping in his hand. The hallway erupted with whispers. "A judge? Her son's a judge? He ain't just important, he's powerful. Oh, he done messed with the wrong mother." Jonathan's gaze was sharp enough to cut steel. "Mr. Clark," he said, "we're going to talk. Right now." Clark swallowed hard. I I didn't know she. Jonathan lifted a hand. Stop. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Clark froze. Jonathan's eyes flickered to the crumpled, torn receipts scattered on Evelyn's floor. Did you destroy her payment records? Clark opened his mouth, but Jonathan stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. I would think very carefully before you answer that. The tenants behind them held their breath, because they knew this was no longer landlord versus elderly woman. This was predator versus a man who could dismantle his life with a single court order. Jonathan looked at the notice again, then at Clark. This eviction is illegal, he said. Every word of it. Clark's face reddened. Wait, You forged accusations, Jonathan continued. You threatened property removal. You attempted an immediate eviction without court approval. And you targeted a vulnerable senior. He stepped closer, the authority rolling off him like thunder. Those aren't just violations, Mr. Clark. He leaned in slightly. They're crimes. Clark's clipboard slipped from his fingers and hit the hallway floor. Jonathan straightened, turning toward the tenants. Everyone, he said calmly, start recording. Phones lifted instantly. Dozens of them. Clark's face went pale. Hold on, we can talk. No, Jonathan said. You talked enough. He placed his hand protectively on his mother's shoulder. You threatened the wrong woman. For a moment, the third-floor hallway of Magnolia Arms felt less like an apartment building and more like a courtroom. Except this time, the judge had come to the people, not the other way around. Phones were already out. Tenants lined the walls, cameras pointed, recording with shaky hands and held breath. No one wanted to miss a single second. Jonathan stood in the center of it all, steady as a pillar. One hand rested lightly on his mother's shoulder. The other held the crumpled eviction notice like evidence. The landlord, Mr. Stephen Clark, looked smaller than he had an hour ago. A lot smaller. Let's start from the top, Jonathan said calmly, eyes fixed on him. You served my mother with a notice to vacate by tonight. He read from the paper, voice clear and sharp. Notice to vacate immediately. Cause, non-payment, property damage, and repeated violation of tenant rules. He lifted his gaze. Those are serious accusations. Clark tried to straighten his posture, forcing a laugh that came out thin. I'm just enforcing the lease terms. It's all standard procedure. She's been late. She has clutter. Don't lie, Evelyn whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Jonathan's grip on her shoulder tightened gently, steadying her. He turned the full weight of his stare on Clark. I've reviewed the notice, he said. It contains no official court case number, no filing stamp, no judge's signature, no proper service date, no legal grounds listed for immediate removal, and it threatens to dispose of personal property without due process. He held it up for the cameras. For the record, he said, this is not a lawful eviction notice. This is intimidation on paper. A low murmur rippled through the hallway. That's right. Knew it didn't look right. He been doing this to everybody. Clark's face flushed. Look, I don't have to explain my management practices to you. I own this building. Jonathan cocked his head slightly. Do you? Interesting, because as of right now, this building is an ongoing investigation scene. Clark blinked. Investigation? Jonathan stepped closer. You told my mother, he said, voice low but carrying. Get out by tonight, or I'll throw your things in the dumpster. The tenants turned toward Clark, some nodding, some whispering. He did. I heard him. Jonathan looked around. Can anyone here confirm hearing that threat? A chorus rose. I heard it. Teresa. He said it clear as day, Mr. Harris. I was at my door. He yelled it. Mrs. Diaz. Hands lifted. Phone zoomed in. Clark swallowed, sweat beading at his hairline. That statement, Jonathan continued smoothly, combined with this falsified notice, constitutes harassment, attempted unlawful eviction, and, given my mother's age, potential elder abuse under state and federal statutes. Clark stammered. I didn't know she was your mother. Jonathan's eyes hardened. So it would have been okay, he said, if she was just some other elderly woman whose kids don't show up in suits. The hallway went dead quiet again. Jonathan tilted his head. Is that your position, Mr. Clark? No, that's not what I meant, Clark sputtered. You're twisting. Let's stay with the facts, Jonathan said. You targeted elderly, low-income, rent-controlled tenants, didn't you? He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the crowd. Has anyone else here received suspicious notices, threats, harassment, new rules that magically appeared after the building changed ownership? Tenants exchanged looks. One by one, hands lifted. Me. And me. He sent me something. I got like 3 papers on my door. He said my kids weren't allowed to visit after 9. Teresa stepped forward, voice firm. He told me if I didn't pay some late fees from years ago, he'd find someone who deserved my unit more. I've never been late, Mrs. Diaz added. He tried to ban my cat after 11 years. Said I was violating something, but couldn't show me where. Mr. Harris lifted his cane slightly. He gave me a noise violation. I can barely hear my own TV, and I live alone. Jonathan nodded slowly. He turned back to Clark. So, he said, this wasn't an isolated misunderstanding. This is a pattern. Clark tried to rally. You can't just walk in here and accuse me. You're right, Jonathan cut in. I don't need to accuse you. He pulled his phone from his pocket, swiping across the screen. Because everything I've said so far is already supported by witness testimony, on-the-record recordings. He gestured to the tenants' phones, and this entire bogus notice in my hand. Clark shifted from foot to foot, eyes flicking to the cameras. You a lawyer or something? He muttered. Jonathan didn't smile. I'm a federal judge. The words dropped like a hammer. You could hear someone whisper, "Oh, Jesus!" Under they. Jonathan continued, tone steady and professional. And I am required by my oath to report any criminal misconduct I encounter, particularly involving vulnerable citizens being targeted through abuse of power. Clark's voice cracked. This is overkill. It's a housing dispute, that's all. We can handle this like adults. You had your chance to handle it like an adult, Jonathan replied calmly. Instead, you ripped up my mother's records, threatened to trash her belongings, and falsified documents to scare her out of her home. He turned to his mother then, his expression softening for the first time since he arrived. Ma, he said quietly, did you ever miss a rent payment? She shook her head, tears glistening. Never, baby. 30 years. I always pay. On time. I got copies in the drawer. She keeps everything, Mrs. Diaz added. She even helps us keep track. Jonathan nodded. Good, he said. We'll need all of that. Then he looked straight into one of the recording phones, knowing exactly how this could spread. For anyone watching this, he said, this is what happens when landlords think poor, elderly tenants don't have anyone to stand up for them. They count on silence. They count on fear. They count on people not knowing their rights. Clark hissed under his breath. You can't talk to me like that in my building. Jonathan turned his head slowly. Say that again, he asked quietly. Clark faltered. Jonathan took one step closer, just one, but it was enough to make Clark lean back. This is not just your building, Jonathan said. This is my mother's home, these people's homes. and as of right now, it's also a potential crime scene. As if on cue, there was noise at the stairwell, heavy steps, static on radios, police. 2 officers appeared at the top of the stairs, looking slightly overwhelmed by the sight of a crowded hallway full of phones. "Officers," Jonathan said, turning toward them. "Perfect timing." Clark's eyes bulged. "You called the police on me?" Jonathan lifted his phone. "I did," he replied, "as soon as I hung up with my mother. I also spoke with a colleague at the city attorney's office and left a preliminary message for the housing authority." The officers approached, hands resting near their belts, but not tense. "Sir," one of them said to Jonathan, "you the one who called about unlawful eviction and harassment?" "Yes," Jonathan replied. "I'm Judge Jonathan Brooks, Federal Court, Eastern District. I'm here off duty, as a private citizen and as this woman's son." He stepped aside slightly, placing a hand on Evelyn's shoulder again. "This is my mother, Miss Evelyn Brooks. She's being targeted for fraudulent eviction." The officers glanced at each other quickly. "Yes, Your Honor," the other officer said almost instinctively. Straightening, the tenant's whisper surged. "He called him Your Honor." "This man really a judge?" Clark tried to regain control. "This is being blown way out of proportion," he protested. "She's in violation. I'm just doing my job. This is a civil matter. Y'all can't—" One officer held up a hand. "Sir, we've had multiple calls from this address about harassment from management. We're here to investigate." Jonathan handed the officer the eviction notice. "Start with this," he said. "You'll find no legal filing, no court involvement, and no justification for a same-day vacate demand. And witnesses will confirm he threatened to throw her belongings into the dumpster without due process." The officer read quickly, frowned, then looked at Clark. "Sir, did you serve this?" he asked. Yes, but did you file this through housing court?" the officer pressed. "Is there a case number we can reference?" Clark's jaw clenched. "I haven't had the chance yet. It's in process." "That's not what you told her," Jonathan cut in. "You told her she had to be out tonight. That's not in process. That's coercion." The officer nodded slowly. "Sir," he said to Clark, "you can't force a tenant out without formal proceedings. Threatening to dump her property is, at minimum, improper. At worst," he glanced at Jonathan, "criminal." Jonathan gave a small nod. "We'll let the DA label it," he said. "But I suspect they'll be interested in the pattern here. Not just one incident." Another tenant stepped forward. "Officer, he did this to me too," Teresa said. "Sent a letter saying I owed thousands in back fees I never agreed to. I got my records." "And me," Mrs. Diaz added quickly. "He tried to evict me over my cat." "And me," Mr. Harris said. "He said I was disturbing the peace with no proof." The officers looked around at the sea of raised hands. One of them nodded slowly, reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12, he said. "We're going to need additional support from housing enforcement for multiple reports of unlawful practices at Magnolia Arms." Clark's face went from red to gray. "This is insane," he whispered. Jonathan's expression didn't soften. "No," he said. "This is accountability." He turned back to his mother, his voice gentle again. "Ma," he said, crouching next to her, "I'm going to make sure this never happens to you again. You hear me?" Her eyes were wet, lip trembling. "You came," she whispered. "I didn't want to bother you, but I was so scared, baby." His face broke then, just a little. "Don't you ever apologize for needing me," he said. "You spent your life standing between me and the world. It's my turn now." She reached up, cupping his cheek. "I just wanted you safe," she said softly. "Didn't want my troubles adding to yours." He shook his head. "You're not trouble," he whispered. "You're my mother." Behind them, one officer began taking Clark aside, reading him his rights, not as an arrest, not yet, but as part of a formal statement. The other officer took notes, collecting names, statements, and copies of notices from tenants. The building, once quiet and resigned, was now buzzing. People weren't just watching, they were stepping forward, sharing their stories, finding their voices. Because sometimes it only takes one person standing up to remind everyone else that they can stand too. And the man who thought he held all the power in this place was starting to realize he'd never had any real power at all. Just fear. And fear doesn't work so well when the whole hallway is watching, and the quiet old lady in 3B turns out to have a son who knows exactly which laws to swing. The police presence multiplied quickly. What started with 2 officers grew to 4, then 6. Word traveled fast in buildings like Magnolia Arms. Neighbors opened doors. Cameras kept rolling. And for the first time in years, tenants who felt powerless saw the balance shift. Not slowly, but all at once. A single judge had walked into their hallway, and the whole system that had kept them scared started to crumble. 2 officers escorted Mr. Clark to the end of the hallway, where they began taking his statement, or attempted to. He was sweating through his shirt now, pacing in tight circles, waving his hands, voice cracking as he tried to spin excuses. "I wasn't threatening her. I misunderstood the forms. Look, I'm new to owning buildings, okay? I didn't know everything had to go through the court. I thought—" One officer held up a hand. "Sir, stop talking unless you want everything you say on record." "But she's making this dramatic," Clark blurted. "I didn't know she was connected to—" The officer's expression sharpened. "So it would have been okay if she didn't have a connected son? That wasn't what you said earlier." Clark's face went ghostly. I didn't—" "Sir," the officer cut in, "you're in a very deep hole. Stop digging." Meanwhile, Jonathan had moved into a calmer, methodical mode. He was no longer reacting emotionally. He was building a case. Every tenant who had experienced harassment gathered around him in a loose half-circle. Phones still recording. Voices trembling. People who had kept quiet for months, even years, finally speaking. Jonathan opened his leather notebook, the one he always carried, even off the bench. "All right," he said, tapping the first line. "I need dates, times, and the exact wording of every threat you received." Mrs. Diaz stepped forward, clutching an envelope of saved notices. "He told me my cat was cause for immediate removal," she said softly, "but the lease says nothing like that." "Perfect," Jonathan said. "We'll log that." Teresa added, "He tried charging me $2,000 of back rent from before he even bought the building." Jonathan nodded. "Illegal. Continue." Mr. Harris lifted his cane. "I got 3 noise violations. I ain't host a party since 1987. Laughter rippled through the hallway, short but real. Jonathan wrote fast, detailed, organized. He looked up at the group. "Everyone, listen carefully," he said. "You have more rights than he ever wanted you to know." Tenants leaned closer. "He cannot evict you without court approval, threaten your property, forge accusations, demand additional money not stated in your lease, enter your units without proper notice, create new rules without legal posting, target specific tenants to push them out." Gasps and whispers traveled through the hallway. Jonathan continued, voice steady. "And if he does any of that with malicious intent, especially toward elderly tenants, it becomes criminal." One of the younger tenants raised her hand. "But he owns the building." Jonathan shook his head. "He doesn't own you." Silence. Then a few nods, then more. Confidence was contagious. And Jonathan carried enough for all of them. One of the officers approached Jonathan. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, "we've reviewed the notice. It's fraudulent. There's no legal basis for a same-day eviction." Jonathan nodded. Did he admit to threatening to dispose of her belongings? "We're getting conflicting statements," the officer replied, "but multiple witnesses confirm it. We have enough to file a report." Jonathan's gaze hardened. "Good. Because I intend to pursue every path available, criminal, civil, federal if necessary." The officer nodded back like a soldier receiving orders. "Yes, sir." Clark overheard. He stumbled forward, voice cracking. "Judge Brooks, please, can we talk privately? This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to upset your mother. I didn't know her situation." Jonathan turned slowly. "Oh?" he said. "So if she truly had no family, you would have followed through?" "No, I just—" Jonathan stepped toward him. For the first time, his voice rose slightly. Just slightly. "You threatened to throw a 74-year-old woman's belongings into the trash." Clark paled. "You gave her a forged eviction notice designed to scare her. You ripped up her rent receipts as if her history didn't matter. You manipulated her age and isolation to make her easier to target." He stepped even closer. "You thought no one would protect her." Clark looked like he might collapse. "Please," he whispered. "I didn't mean any harm, I swear." Jonathan's expression didn't soften, not this time. "You meant every bit of harm," he said. "You just didn't expect consequences." Everyone grew quiet when Evelyn slowly lifted herself from the chair. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "Sir," she said softly. Clark turned, startled. "You scared me," Evelyn whispered. You knocked on my door late at night. You took my plants away. You told me I had no right to be in my own home." Her eyes. "You made me feel small." Jonathan reached for her hand, but she squeezed his gently. "I lived here 30 years, she continued, stepping forward with surprising strength. "I raised children here. I held neighbors' babies. I cooked for folks who didn't have nothing. I paid my rent with dignity." A tear rolled down her cheek. "And you treated me like trash on your shoe." The hallway went silent. Jonathan's breath hitched, just once. Clark looked away, ashamed, not because he felt guilt, but because he was cornered. The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to Evelyn gently, "we need to take your statement." She nodded, straightening her back. "I'll give you whatever you need," she said. "I ain't scared no more." As the officers finished documenting violations, Clark's facade completely crumbled. He wiped sweat from his forehead. He stammered incoherently. He looked around the hallway for support. None came. No neighbor defended him. No tenant vouched for him. Because the man who had controlled this building through fear now had nothing left to hold on to. "Sir," one officer said, "we're escorting you downstairs to continue this investigation at the precinct." Clark sputtered, Am I being arrested?" "Not tonight," the officer said, "but you're not staying in this building." Wait, this is my property." The officer pointed to the tenants' phones. "Not tonight, it's not." Clark sagged, deflated, defeated. The officers escorted him down the hall, with every tenant watching. Some with relief, some with vindication, some with tears, but none with fear anymore. When the hallway finally cleared of officers and commotion, Jonathan turned back to his mother. He crouched, took both her hands. "Ma," he whispered, voice cracking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I'm so sorry you went through this. I should have known something was wrong. I should have been here sooner." She stroked his cheek. "You came," she said softly. He swallowed hard. I'm not leaving you alone again, not for a minute." Evelyn smiled, the kind of tired smile that only comes after surviving a storm. "I know, baby." She squeezed his hand. "You always come when it matters." Jonathan lowered his forehead to her hands, overcome. Her boy. Her brilliant, gentle, powerful boy. And all she'd ever wanted was for him to be safe. Now, he was the one keeping her safe. For the first time in hours, Magnolia Arms felt still again. The police had left. The recordings had stopped. The echo of chaos had faded down the stairwell with Mr. Clark. Only the tenants remained, clustered in the hallway. The weight of everything they had just witnessed settling into their bones like a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Jonathan slid his notebook into his jacket and turned toward his mother. "Let's get you inside, Ma," he said softly. Evelyn nodded, exhausted. Her body moved slowly, like someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. He helped her stand, one hand beneath her elbow, and guided her into the apartment that suddenly felt smaller than he remembered. Older, worn down at the edges, filled with memories, but lacking the comfort she deserved. He noticed everything now: the peeling paint near the window, the wobbling cabinet door, the faded carpet she kept vacuuming even though it had lost its color years ago, the old fan that clicked every third rotation. He took it all in, with the widening understanding that his busy life, his courtroom, his rulings, his travel, had kept him too far from the details of hers. He sat her gently on the couch and knelt in front of her, the same way he knelt when he first arrived. "Ma," he said quietly, "this is never happening again. I promise you that." She brushed his cheek with trembling fingers. "You already did enough today, Jonathan." "No," he said, shaking his head. Today was just the start. Magnolia Arms buzzed before sunrise. Word had spread. Fast. Not just through the building, but across the neighborhood. People walking their dogs paused near the entrance. Folks in the bodega whispered. 2 local teens posted a video on social media from the night before, and by morning, it had thousands of views. Everyone wanted to know, who was the quiet old lady? And why was her son a federal judge tearing down a landlord in the hallway? Jonathan arrived again at 8 a.m., this time with a briefcase, a laptop, and a look that said he hadn't slept. But it didn't matter. He met with the officers in the lobby. He filed formal statements. He requested a temporary injunction to halt any eviction attempts for the entire building. He submitted evidence of tenant harassment and discrimination. By noon, the wheels of justice were turning faster than Clark could ever have anticipated. 2 days later, Magnolia Arms received a notice taped to the front door. Not from Clark, not from a shady management company, from the housing court. Large, bold letters read, "Temporary injunction granted. All evictions halted until further order." Jonathan read it aloud to the gathered tenants. Every person exhaled as if they had been holding their breath for years. Mrs. Diaz cried into her hands. Mr. Harris muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." Teresa hugged Evelyn so tightly she nearly toppled over. But Jonathan wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He filed a civil suit on behalf of his mother and the entire building. Charges included elder harassment, attempted unlawful eviction, fraudulent notices, emotional distress, targeted discrimination, violation of tenant rights. Was the kind of lawsuit that sank landlords. And Jonathan filed it with a precision that only someone who truly understood the law and truly loved the person harmed could. When Evelyn heard how much compensation the tenants were eligible for, she covered her mouth in disbelief. "Baby, I don't need all that," she whispered. Jonathan smiled softly. "Ma, it's not about the money. It's about making things right. The other tenants stood beside her. You saved us too, Teresa said. This ain't just your victory, it's ours. Within a month, a court-appointed management company took control of Magnolia Arms. Gone were the threatening notes. Gone were the midnight knocks. Gone was the fear that had hung like a storm cloud over every elderly tenant. Repairs began immediately. New paint, new locks, new lighting, new signage, and new protections for every resident. A lawyer from the housing authority visited weekly. Forms were simplified, rights were explained, support was offered freely. Evelyn watched it all with disbelief. "Oh Lord," she murmured one afternoon, watering her plants now safely returned to the hallway. "This building ain't looked this pretty in decades." Jonathan chuckled. "It's not done yet." Because he had one more gift, for her alone. One quiet afternoon, he asked her to step outside with him. "Where are we going?" she asked, gripping his arm. "You'll see," he said. He guided her around the corner where a sleek, newly refurbished apartment building stood. Clean brick, polished windows, trimmed hedges. A silver plaque near the entrance read, "Brookside Residences. Affordable senior living community." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Oh my, this place looks expensive." Jonathan smiled. "It's yours." She blinked. "Mine?" "The company is offering it as part of the settlement," he said. "Rent-controlled, fully renovated, ground floor with a garden patio." Her hand flew to her heart. "But my plants, my neighbors, my home." "You won't be far," he whispered. "A block away, but safer, comfortable, protected. And I'll be here every weekend." Tears filled her eyes. "Jonathan, baby, you didn't have to do all this." He cupped her shoulders gently. "Yes," he said, "I did." He leaned in, forehead touching hers. "You raised me," he whispered. "Fed me, held me, saved me. Now it's my turn." She broke, sobbing softly into his chest. He held her for a long time. Moving day was a celebration. Tenants from Magnolia Arms, the same ones who had once been too scared to speak, came to help. They carried boxes, hung curtains, set up her knitting chair, placed her plants along the patio wall. Mrs. Diaz brought empanadas. Teresa brought her kids. Mr. Harris supervised the furniture arrangement like a general. Everyone moved like family. Jonathan watched with quiet pride, standing by the door. His mother, the woman who had lived so modestly, so humbly for so long, now stepped into a new home filled with light, safety, and dignity. And she paused in the center of the living room, turning slowly, taking it all in. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jonathan kissed her forehead. "Just like you deserve." Morning sunlight spilled softly across Evelyn's new apartment, warming the wooden floors and touching the leaves of her favorite fern, as if greeting an old friend. She moved slowly along the patio, watering her plants with the calm rhythm she'd always kept. Steady hands, gentle humming, the soft scrape of the watering can against the railing. But something was different now. Something lighter. Her shoulders didn't curl inward anymore. Her breath didn't catch at every knock. Her nights were quiet and safe. She hummed as she watered the last pot. A group of children from the neighborhood passed by outside the patio fence. "Morning, Miss Evelyn," they chorused. She smiled, waving softly. "Good morning, babies." Her heart warmed at the sound. This was home, not because of the new walls or the repaired windows or the fresh paint, but because she finally had peace inside them. Inside, a small radio played old gospel music. The curtains fluttered in a soft breeze. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon oil and lavender. Evelyn placed her watering can down and went inside, settling into her knitting chair, the one spot that still felt like a hug from the past. She picked up her needles and yarn, letting muscle memory guide her fingers. And as she knitted, her mind wandered. To the hallway of Magnolia Arms, to the papers ripped in her face, to the cruel words, the late-night knocks, the fear she swallowed alone. To the moment she whispered, "Let me call my son." She had tried so hard not to bother him. She thought his world was too important to interrupt. But the truth she had learned, and the truth she carried now, was simple. Sometimes love isn't about staying out of the way. Sometimes love is reaching out, even with trembling hands. She paused her knitting, resting the half-made blanket in her lap. A soft knock came at the door. Not harsh, not hurried, just familiar. She already knew who it was. "Come in, baby," Jonathan stepped inside, filling the space with that quiet strength he carried. He wore no suit today, just jeans and a soft sweater, yet he still walked like a man who could calm storms. "Morning, Ma," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. She touched his cheek, smiling. "You eat yet?" He laughed. "Yes, ma'am." He sat beside her, clasping her hand. "How are you settling in?" "Oh, this place is a blessing," she said, looking around. "Feels like someone finally opened the windows of my life and let the light in." Jonathan nodded, gaze soft. "You gave so much for others," he said. "It was time the world caught up." She squeezed his hand. "God caught up, you caught up. That's enough for me." They sat together in quiet for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the radio. Finally, Evelyn spoke again, this time in a voice that carried years of wisdom. "You know, baby, people think kindness is weakness." Jonathan looked at her. She continued, eyes roaming softly across the row. "But kindness raised you. Kindness taught you right from wrong. Kindness made you into a man who could stand in that hallway and make a whole building feel safe." He swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. "You taught me that," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "We ain't raised on riches. We ain't raised on fancy things, but we were raised right. And sometimes that's all the wealth you need." Her eyes softened with memory. "When you were little, folks used to say I was spoiling you," she said. "Said I talked to you too gentle, held you too close." Jonathan's eyes warmed. "And I used to tell them," she went on, "a child who knows he's loved grows up to be a man who knows how to love." She leaned back, breathing in slowly. "And look at you now." He looked away, blinking hard. "Ma," he said softly, "I wish I'd come sooner. I wish I'd seen what he was doing. I should have been here." She shook her head and took his hand again. "You came when I called," she whispered. "That's what matters. You showed up when the world pushed too hard." Her voice grew quieter, more reflective. "Sometimes the strong ones ain't the loud ones. Sometimes they're the quiet folks overlook. The ones who love gentle, who mind their business, who don't make noise." She lifted her chin slightly. "But when you push them too far, that quiet becomes the loudest thing in the room." Jonathan nodded. He knew she wasn't just talking about herself. She was talking about every person in Magnolia Arms who had been scared silent small until someone showed them their voices again. That afternoon, Evelyn walked outside with Jonathan. They sat together on a bench, beneath the shade of a tree. The building behind them, once a place of fear, now stood sturdy, repaired, watched over. Two kids ran past, chasing each other. A mother strolled by with a stroller. An elderly man waved at her from his balcony. Life was moving again. Warmly, Evelyn looked over the quiet street, sunlight catching in her silver hair. Her voice drifted softly, almost like a prayer, almost like a lesson she was leaving for the world. People underestimate the quiet ones, she said. They think gentle means weak. They think soft means breakable. She smiled faintly, but gentle hands raised a judge. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the truth of her words settle deep in his heart. Evelyn continued, her voice warm and steady. A mother's love don't need wealth, she murmured, but sometimes it raises it. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Jonathan reached over and rested his hand on hers. "Ma," he whispered, "you're my strength." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And you," she whispered, "are my proof that kindness builds power." The camera of life seemed to pull back then, from the bench, from the quiet street, from the building now protected and at peace. Evelyn closed her eyes, lifting her face to the sun, and in her final voiceover, the moral she had earned, her truth rang clear. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Their strength shows when the world pushes too hard.